Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. We are in the doctor's opinion. I want to go back a little bit and just rehash. We are on actually, if you have the fourth edition, we're on page XXIX. If you have the study version, it's XXVII. Um, and if that isn't confusing enough, I want to go back to the previous page, which is in the fourth edition XXVIII. I love that. And in the study version XXVI, I want to talk about the second paragraph that says, "We believe and so suggested a few years ago." And that's making reference to Dr. Silkworth's article in the Lancet Journal, a renowned British medical journal, where he explained his theories on alcoholism and having a physical component as well as a mental component. And it was not well received. He suggested that the spiritual solution is probably the best idea, the best solution, but it didn't go over well. So when he wrote this opinion, he asked Bill not to use his name in it because he didn't want to go through that again. But he's making reference to it here. And what he said a few years ago in that article is that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics, that's those of us with the allergy and the obsession, is a manifestation of an allergy. That the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class, and the phenomenon of craving is the manifestation of that allergy. That's how the allergy manifests itself. If you're allergic to strawberries and you eat one, no, we're not going to go there yet, Maureen. And you eat one, you immediately break out in hives. If you have an allergy to ragweed or pollen or hay fever, like I do, I'm exposed to just the slightest bit and I immediately have a physical manifestation. I sneeze, I sniffle, I wheeze, I tear. Well, the symptoms, the manifestations of our allergy, this allergic type reaction, is craving. The normal reaction to the ingestion of these chemicals is to at some point say no. Either I'm going to get sick if I do more, or I've got to drive, so I got to take it easy, or they say strange things like, I'm right where I want to be, or I don't need any more. Well, I always drank with the expectation of arriving where I wanted if I just had one more and just more, one more. So my reaction, my abnormal reaction, my allergic abnormal reaction to the ingestion of these chemicals is the craving. That's the manifestation of this allergic type reaction. And he also mentions here that these allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And to me, taking a liberal view of that means anything I could smoke or swallow or shoot or drink or snort that changes my perception of reality is alcohol in one form or another. And he's saying that we could never safely use that at any point at all. And in this one paragraph, he talks about the two parts of step one. Step one, the first part, basically says, I can't handle alcohol. And that's what he's touching on here. He says the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the normal, average temperate drinker, the normal drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit, here comes the second part of the first step. There's a dash in the middle of the first step. We are powerless over alcohol, dash, that our lives had become unmanageable. Here comes what's after the dash. The first part of the first step says, I can't handle alcohol. The second part of the first step says, I can't handle sobriety either, because it says, once having formed the habit, found they cannot break it, once having lost their confidence, their reliance upon things human, we are beyond human aid. Their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. In other words, they become unmanageable. And if you've got the 4th edition here, I'm going to suggest that you draw a line across the page from where it says difficult to solve, right across the page. Opposite it is a paragraph that begins with on the other hand. So if you've got the 4th edition, just draw a line across. If you've got the study version, just draw a line and then pick it up on the next page. So we're going from where it says their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. And then we're going right to the other page, which says, on the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, and the rest of this is in pink, it is a promise. Once a psychic change has occurred, a psychic change, a change in our way of thinking, a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol, meaning the obsession. The only effort necessary, as a rule, being the required to follow a few simple rules. 2 musts in one sentence. The word necessary, the word required. We highlight musts in green highlight in this book, in this workshop. And we're now up to, I believe, the latest count is 141. It was 139, but I revised it for the presentation we're going to be giving in Belfast, and we're up to 141 references to musts. And sometimes it appears as necessary or required, etc. So if we go back to where we were on the previous page, we're told that frothy emotional appeal seldom suffice. Love is not enough. An intervention is not enough. My dad's telling me, begging me to please stop, to see what I'm doing to him and the family. For my uncles to call me and tell me if I don't give a damn about what I'm doing to my dad, maybe I care about what I'm doing to their brother. That is a frothy emotional appeal. Please stop killing our brother, your father. That's a frothy emotional appeal. And it worked for a little bit. And then when things quiet down and everyone's off my back, I start again slowly and go through the same cycle again. What we repeat over and over, we mentioned it, is that periods we're going to mention in a moment, periods of unbearable drinking, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety, followed by periods of unbearable drinking. And that's what we repeat over and over.
Howard, you're muted.
I'm sorry. I'm just getting something here about my AI companion. I want to turn it off. I don't know what it is, but I don't want it. Okay. Sorry. It was interrupting. You couldn't see it, but it was on my screen here. Okay. So let's try and get through this here. Frothy emotional appeals seldom suffice. In other words, it's insufficient. Frothy emotional appeals. Love is insufficient. Fear is insufficient. If you're told that if you do this again, we're going to divorce you, you're going to lose your job, whatever it is, those may work for a period of time, but they are insufficient higher powers because they, in the long run, fail. And he's saying in nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves. So now we're talking about step 2. We started a moment ago about the 2 parts of step 1. I can't handle alcohol and I can't handle sobriety. And now we're talking about step 2. The ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. Recreate. The 1939 dictionary defines recreate as to create anew. It doesn't mean to restore to the condition it was in before. It means that if we do this work, we can look back and say, I'm not the same person I was when I started this. I have recreated my life. I don't respond to things the way I did before. I don't act. I don't react. I act. I have recreated my life. And let's jump down to the bottom of that page, which says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect created by it. Anyone who tells me they drink because they like the taste, I don't buy that. Beer tastes like crap. I mean, I like the taste of Snapple's combination iced tea and lemonade, but I never drank a case of it. I like a lot of cold ice mountain water, but I never walked over to a water fountain and put my head under it and emptied the whole thing and then went and got another bottle of it and emptied that whole thing also. That's not what we drink for. We drink because we like the effect. I like to get high. That's the effect I like. It allows me to be everything I want to be, but I wasn't. And when Bill describes his first intoxication experience, he said, somebody gave me a Bronx cocktail and I drank it, and the entire face of the universe instantly changed. I was part of life at last. I was released from this burden of self, from this gnawing sense of responsibility. And boy, was that true. And once I got that taste, I wanted it to stay forever. Once I got that relief, I never wanted it to go away. I wanted to be there all the time. And it says here, the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it's injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. And here we now get into the spiritual malady. Please highlight they are restless, irritable, and discontented, and underline those three words, restless, irritable, and discontented, because those three things are the symptoms of our abnormal reaction to sobriety. We have an abnormal reaction to the ingestion of chemicals manifested by craving. We have an abnormal reaction to sobriety manifested by being restless and irritable and discontented. And you know what? that just puts it mildly. You know, I was vibrating. My body would be sick all the time. I was shaking. I was in serious trouble and I had to get this thing off of me. And I knew that the only way to do that is to have another drink. And it gave me everything I wanted. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again, please highlight this, experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. That euphoria. And incidentally, I want to point out that the words he uses are sense of ease and comfort. It's not real because we've already been told we can't differentiate the true from the false. We think it's a sense of ease and comfort. It's not a solution at all. And he says, after they have succumbed to the desire again, as many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over again, periods of unbearable drunkenness, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety, followed by periods of unbearable drunkenness, followed by periods of unbearable sobriety. I think you get the point. I don't need to go through it again and again. That is what's repeated over and over. But whenever anyone says, how do you know that craving refers to the physical reaction of the ingestion of alcohol? I point out several things on this page, and this is one of them. Because what we just read says, after we succumb to the desire is the mental obsession. After we give into that mental obsession, and take that drink, what happens? The phenomenon of craving develops. After we take the drink, that's when it develops, never before. So whenever I hear anyone saying at a meeting, gee, I was craving a drink all day today, I know what he means. You know what he means. The problem is he doesn't know what he means in the context of the big book. In the context of the big book, physical craving refers to the physical reaction of the ingestion of alcohol. Up until that point, it's up here. It's up here. It's not physical yet. And he says this is repeated over and over, and unless the person can experience an entire psychic change, a change in our way of thinking, there is very little hope of his recovery. A psychic change that occurs in the mind. And before we go any further here, I wanted to take a moment to talk about something that we really kind of blew over last week. And I had a number of people who asked me to go back over it. So let's talk about this craving. I mentioned that craving, if today, I don't think it would be referred to as a phenomenon at all, because a phenomenon is defined as an observable but unexplainable fact. We could see it, but we cannot explain it. Well, today, we can explain it. We know how the body metabolizes alcohol different from other people, from normal drinkers. And we know that we have this actual allergic type reaction. And so let's talk about that. If it were today, the phenomenon would not be a phenomenon, it would just be craving. And let's talk about the metabolism. Today, if you put anything in your system, such as a piece of bread, a piece of beefsteak, that the mind and body recognizes what's being fed it, and certain things happen. Certain organs in the body begin to produce things called enzymes. These enzymes attack the food and break it down into separate usable and non-usable items. What the body can use, such as proteins, amino acids, vitamins, the body retains. What it can't use will dissipate through the urinary and intestinal tract. That's what's called metabolism. Today, they've proven that the doctor's opinion is no longer just an opinion, it's actually truth. And just to stress the obvious, this is not an official AA information. AA won't get involved in why we're allergic. That's an outside issue. It brings controversy. But this information, which was presented a few years ago by members in the medical community, is so interesting and has such depth and meaning, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't look at it. For years, I never got into this, but people ask me why. Here it is. It used to make my hair hurt to go through this stuff, but there's enough interest, so let's talk about it. So take, for example, this group of normal drinkers who are able to drink safely. They are at ease with alcohol. It doesn't present a dis-ease for them. They are at ease. They can take a drink or two. Their body and mind senses it. The enzyme production starts, and the enzymes attack the alcohol. The enzymes break down into acetaldehyde. I think that's the proper pronunciation of that, acetaldehyde. And then it breaks it down into dietetic acid, and then it breaks it down into acetone. And here's where the problems start. In this final stage, it becomes a simple carbohydrate made up of water, sugar, and carbon dioxide. The water is dissipated through the urinary and intestinal tract. The sugar is a form of energy which the body will burn and store as fat to be used at a later date. The carbon dioxide is dissipated through the lungs. In the normal drinker, this takes place at a rate of about 1 ounce per hour. While it varies with different people, the average seems to be about 1 ounce per hour is metabolized. And if they don't drink any more than that 1 ounce per hour, they can't get drunk. Their body metabolizes it, burns it up properly, gets rid of it at a rate. Very seldom do you see a social drinker drink more than an ounce per hour. And if you're with them and they're drinking at a faster rate of more than an ounce an hour, you better get out of the way, because they're going to puke on you after a while. They're either going to go to sleep or they'll puke on you. One of the two, every time. Now let's look at the alcoholic, the one who cannot drink with impunity. He is at dis-ease with alcohol. And that's what separates us from the others. So if we take the same scenario, the alcoholic puts the alcohol in our body, the same thing happens. The body and the mind sense it, the enzyme production starts. It breaks it down into acetaldehyde, then into dietetic acid, and then into acetone. Here's where the problem starts. In the final stage, it seems as though our bodies, the enzymes necessary to break down acetone into those simple carbohydrates, are not the same as in the body of a non-alcoholic. Therefore, it stays in our body, that acetone stays in our body longer than it does for a normal drinker. It's proven today that the acetone ingested into the human system remains there for an appreciable period of time, will produce an actual physical craving for more of the same. If our body doesn't process that acetone and break it down into carbohydrates and so on, it stays in our body as acetone and creates an actual physical craving. This shows how alcohol is not completely processed through the alcoholic's body and the resulting havoc that it creates. In a non-alcoholic's body, the acetone goes through the final stage of conversion to a simple carbohydrate so rapidly that the craving never occurs. In our body, it stays there long enough, thereby allowing that craving to develop, which demands a second drink and a third drink and a fourth drink and so on. The alcoholic's acetone level goes up. And if the acetone is what causes the craving, then the craving gets harder with each drink. Now you put it in the third and the acetone increases, causing the craving to intensify, and that demands the fourth. As the acetone level increases with each drink, the craving becomes greater and greater and greater. Because the more you drink, the more you crave, it's endless once it starts. And here's something else that I didn't think about, but is real interesting. We know that alcoholism is a progressive disease. That's true whether we're drinking or sober some 20-odd years. In relation to the physical aspect, for each year we grow older in sobriety, our bodies grow older too. So when I picked up after my first relapse, after 10 years, my body reacted as if it had been drinking every one of those 10 days of the 10 years that I wasn't drinking. But here's something that we don't take into consideration. I had aged 10 years as well. And so it says here, as the body ages, the production of enzymes need to break down alcohol slows down as well. It remains longer in the system, will trigger a stronger craving than he ever felt before. The drinking will be worse, and it'll be much harder to stop. We do not pick up where we left off. We pick up as if we never left off. So not only do we have a physical illness, but it's progressive because of the damage it does to our body and due to the aging factor. This is one of the reasons why you have people with, say, 30 years sobriety, and they go out and you never see them again because their body reacts as if they've been drinking every one of the 30 years that they weren't, but they're now 60 and 70 years old. They're not 20 and 30 years old anymore. Their body can't handle it like it did before. So the need is greater. The ability to cut back is greater, which is why more people take the shortcut and commit suicide rather than coming back. You don't see too many people who had 30 or 40 years sobriety go out and come back again. Pretty rare. More often than not, I've heard them take the other way out. So now that we can see that, we can hopefully accept the fact that we can no longer handle alcohol like other people. So that should answer the question of why we are abnormal drinkers versus the normal consumption of alcohol and acetone. So let's move on from there. On page again, in the fourth edition, XXVII is on the study edition, I'm sorry. The fourth edition is XXIX. The paragraph I'm going to start out with is, men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal. Doctor, I can't go on like this. We're at the middle of that page. I'll take a moment for you guys to find the place. It says, Doctor, men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal. Doctor, I can't go on like this. I've got everything to live for. I must stop. There's a must. For those of you who think there's no musts in the book, there's one we circle in green. I must stop, but I cannot. You must, oops, there's another one that isn't there, must help me. So we're putting the responsibility on the doctor. We clearly are not aware of the fact that we are beyond human aid, any kind of human aid. Frothy emotional appeals from family members, from courts, from judges, from employers, or appeals to the doctor to fix us. They don't have the tools to do that. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must, oops, there it is again, 3 times in 2 lines. He must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Inadequacy in 1939 is defined as lack of ability. So he's appealing to members of the medical community who are not taking this seriously, this new movement that became known as Alcoholics Anonymous. They think that Dr. Silkworth has been conned by these people. And so Dr. Silkworth is writing a lot of this stuff in this section, directing it at his contemporaries, asking them to please give this an opportunity, because if you're honest with yourself, you have to see we have failed to treat these people properly. And that's what he's saying here. We have to feel our own lack of ability. Although he gives all that's in him, it's often not enough. And please highlight this next sentence. One feels that something more than human power is needed. There's a must. If you need something, it's a must, to produce the essential psychic change. Essential is a must as well. The psychic change, that spiritual experience, excuse me, that is beyond human aid. Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must, there we go again, admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach. In other words, self-knowledge is insufficient as well. So now we know frothy emotional appeals, not enough. Love, not enough. Fear, not enough. Doctors with all of their qualifications, not enough. The ordinary psychological approach, we don't respond to it. Continuing, he says, I don't hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. Please underline mental control, and above it write willpower. It is not a question of willpower. I've had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problem or business deal, which was to be settled on a certain date favorably to them. Please underline, they took a drink. And above it, let's write, gave in to the obsession, because that's what taking a drink is for us. We're giving into the obsession. On the top of the page, Bill said they succumbed to the desire again. Well, here we are down at the bottom of the page, and he's going to say the same thing a little differently. Instead of succumb to the desire, he's saying they took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and please underline, the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount. On the top of the page, it says that the phenomenon of craving develops once they take that drink. Here we say the same thing, that the phenomenon of craving at once becomes paramount. So we've underlined they took a drink, meaning they gave into the obsession. And we've underlined phenomenon of craving. And above it, please write, the allergy takes over. Once it's in us, it's not up to us anymore. We're not making any decisions. We don't decide to have the next and the next and the next. We think we do, but we don't. Our body is calling the shots here. So we've got two references on one page to what happens after you take the first drink. The allergy kicks in. So he says becomes paramount. If something is paramount, it's first and it's foremost, meaning we drink against our will. We have lost the power to choose. We cannot choose to stop once we start because of the allergy. And we cannot choose not to start because of the obsession and because of the physical, the psychic, spiritual malady. So we have, the top of the page starts out saying we have an alcohol problem, right? Once we put it in us, this is what happens. At the bottom of the page, we're pointing out the real problem is we have a sobriety problem. That's the problem. Once we take that drink, all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. And please highlight the rest of this sentence. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control. Please underline not drinking to escape. And above it, I've written for effect. They're not drinking for effect. It said on the other page that we start drinking for effect because we like the effect it creates. We like it. We like the euphoria. We like the high. We like the fact that it turns me into an instant Johnny Carson and Cary Grant all rolled into one. For you younger people, I guess that would be Jimmy Fallon and Ryan Gosling all rolled into one. I am able to function the way I always wanted to, but never could. That's my spiritual malady. So I'm drinking not for effect. Once I start drinking, it says, I'm drinking to overcome a craving beyond my mental control. It's not up to me anymore. There's an interesting quote I came across recently by F. Scott Fitzgerald, the great novelist and alcoholic. And he said the following: first you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes you. Pretty simple, but true. First you take a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes you. Words of profundity from F. Scott Fitzgerald. Continuing on the next page, There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving, and please underline craving, which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. The supreme sacrifice, please underline, and next to it write suicide. The hopelessness, the self-loathing, the hatred that we feel when we cannot use our self-will to overcome this drinking problem needs many to just make that final decision of suicide. Many of you know one of my favorite speakers is Milt Loring, and you won't see him around much. He's retired some years ago, but Milt Loring tells a story of he came to out of a blackout in a prison, a holding cell that he'd been at many times before. But this time he found out that he was in there and he was all beat up and in terrible shape because he was being charged with attempted assassination of a police officer. He tried to kill a cop. But in the cell next to him was a 19-year-old fellow who'd been in there several times over the last few years, last year or two. Milt recognized him, and the guy was talking about the destruction that this has brought to his family, the embarrassment that it's brought to his family, that they're going to come down and they're going to be humiliated and all the neighbors are going to know. And this is what happens every time. And Milt passed out. He nodded out while this kid was talking. And when he came to a few hours later, that young man had hung himself in the cell. He'd made the supreme sacrifice rather than facing his family again and having his family face this again. This is putting an end to it. It's harsh, but that made sense to him. They made the supreme sacrifice rather than going through what they'd have to. And now Dr. Silkworth does something a little interesting. He classifies us. So we're going to try and number and identify the different types of alcoholics. So the first one, he says, the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, here's number one, type number one, the psychopaths. So if you've got the study version in the blank page opposite this, let's write type one, psychopath. If you don't have the study version, maybe you could squeeze it in at the top of the page or the bottom of the page, or maybe write it on one of your notes for the handouts. But type one, psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. Psychopath is defined as a person with an antisocial character, a person who is harmful to himself and others. That's just the definition of it. I had a sponsee recently who, in a blackout, very possibly killed somebody, knocked them off a motorcycle, sent them flying, in his words, about a mile, and he just disappeared, never came back to find out what happened to that person. And it was 30 years in the past, and he felt he did no wrong, he did no harm. That's a psychopathic reaction, that you don't recognize that you're doing damage to the welfare of others and yourself. It's just a simple definition. Doesn't mean anything other than you are exhibiting antisocial, dangerous symptoms. So that's the first type, emotionally unstable psychopaths. We're familiar with this type. They're always going on the wagon. Please underline going on the wagon. For keeps. They are over remorseful. Underline over remorseful, please. Filled with anguish, filled with guilt, and make many resolutions, but never a decision. Underline resolution, and let's take a look at that. What's the difference between a resolution and a decision? Well, a resolution is defined as an intention to do something. It's empty of the actual, it's not an actual promise. It's just an intention to do so. An actual promise is intention to do something that's followed by action. There's your difference between a resolution and a decision. A resolution is just an intention to do something. A decision is followed by action. So this guy is always making promises, never takes action. Then there's the man of the type who is, here's type 2. If you're taking notes on the opposite page, write number 2. Unwilling to admit he cannot take a drink. In other words, denial. We're not talking about a river in Egypt. We're talking about denial. The person who drinks but is unwilling to admit he cannot take that next drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. So on the page opposite it, we have type 1, psychopath. Type 2, in denial, unwilling to admit defeat. Now we go on to, there is the type who always believes, and that's type 3, that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can drink without danger. Let's highlight that phrase. After being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. That could be somebody who just went on the water wagon. It could be a lot of people like myself who went into treatment and thought, well, I haven't had a drink in 30 days. I could handle something. And of course, cannot. So that's the type 3 who believes that after being entirely free, we can drink safely. After 10 years of sobriety, I felt that. Wasn't the case. So there's type number 3, who's entirely free. Then there's the manic depressive type. Here's type 4, manic depressive, who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. So on the page opposite it, we have type 1, psychopath. Type 2, in denial, unwilling to admit defeat. Type 3, believes that after a time they can drink safely. Type 4, manic depressive. And after manic depressive, I've written, we couldn't control our emotional natures. Does that sound familiar? It's one of the bedevilments. We cannot control our emotional natures. Manic depressive type. And here's type 5. I like type 5. I always thought I was a type 5. Then there is the type entirely normal in every respect, and please underline, except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. God, I love that one. I thought I was one of those. I thought I was a number 5. Now, so in our accounting, on the page opposite it, we have type 5, which is defined as entirely normal except when drinking. Now, that's where the book ended, that the classification. But in the original doctor's opinion, there was a type 6. Now, if you happen to have the study version, at the back of the book, you'll notice there are a lot of pages that are gray-edged pages. If you go to those gray-edged pages and you go to the doctor's opinion in that section, it'll be page 3 in those gray pages. And there are a couple of typical alcoholics. There are a couple of page 3s in here. This is the first page 3. But the paragraph that I'm referring to is at the bottom of the page. The paragraph begins with, then there are those who are never properly adjusted to life. If you don't see that, the paragraph before it begins with, the classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail outside the scope of this book. And then he explains them more concisely. But the last paragraph is the one I want to draw your attention to, because this was eliminated from the book. Type 6 was eliminated. Then there are those who are never properly adjusted to life, type 6, called neurotics. The prognosis of this type is unfavorable. Neurotic is defined as emotionally and mentally disturbed, exhibiting anxieties, phobias, irrational fears, and abnormal behaviors. And I think one of the reasons they left it out, at least Bill Shaberg in writing the big book, suggests that one of the reasons may be because it lacked a message of hope. And it could also be used to describe a large portion of any population. So just something to think about. I think I tend to agree with him, but it was eliminated. There's no type 6 anymore. So getting back to where we were in the classification, where we said we're often able, intelligent, friendly people. God, I love that one. And please highlight the whole next paragraph. All these and many others have one thing in common, and underline this: they cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving. There's the third reference to what happens after we start drinking. After we take the drink, the phenomenon of craving develops. After we succumb to the desire. After they take that drink. And here we are in the third reference that says we can't start without developing the phenomenon of craving. This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy, which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never, please underline never, been by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. The only relief we have to suggest and underline entire abstinence. You may want to circle entire abstinence, because that's no middle ground, no compromise. There's no such thing as being a little pregnant. There's no such thing as being a little dead. Either you're pregnant or you're not. Either you're dead or you're not. Either you're an alcoholic or you're not. So what he's saying here, I think, is the following. We have 157 people here today. If every one of us started drinking right now, what you'd notice is some would be up dancing, whether there's music playing or not, doesn't matter. Some would be entertaining the room, thinking they're a comedian. Some will be starting fights for sure. There's some guy in the corner who's bumping into people and starting fights with everybody. There's the guy who sits in the corner like me and just kind of broods into our drink and just sits there and dissects and comments and character assassinates everybody. We all exhibit different behaviors. There's bound to be some people who are hitting on the members of the opposite or the same sex. These are all different behaviors that we manifest when we start drinking. But what he's saying here, I believe, is that We may all exhibit different behaviors, but we all do one thing the same. We all go looking for the next drink. The phenomenon of craving has kicked in, and whether we're dancing or joking or fighting or romancing, whatever it is we're doing, we're also looking for that next drink. So for us, it's all about more. No matter what your behavior is, it's all about more and more and more. And like I said, I always drank with the expectation of arriving where I wanted it to be. If I just had once more, if I just had once more. And those of us, those real alcoholics know you got to drink through that shit. Because you got to get to the promised land on the other side of that. So whether you get sick or whatever it is that happens, you got to drink through that. And the real alcoholic knows that. I may get sick, but on the other side is the promised land. And that's where I want to get. And only the real alcoholic knows that, I think. So, bottom of the page, he says, this immediately precipitates a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but, and please underline the rest of this paragraph, among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. Now I'm going to read that again, and then I'm going to follow it up with something and see if it doesn't sound familiar. Because he's saying to the medical community, we're doomed. We are hopeless. Among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. But we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. What do you think of those apples? That's the foreword to the first edition. It's on our very first page. The medical community says we're doomed, but we of Alcoholics Anonymous have proved them wrong. How do you like them apples? I love that. And that's what I have written after that, is see the forward first 3 lines in the first edition, forward to the first edition. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered. So much for us being doomed. What is the solution? Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. I'm going to try and, we may not get the discussion in, but I want to finish this section before we move on to Bill's story. So I'm going to run through this a little fast. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. That man's name is Hank Parkhurst, Parkhurst. Maureen, you may want to get up number 49 while I'm talking about this. Screen share number 49, Hank's pick and bio. This guy was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage. Nope. The one right before that. Well, he was but partly recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of 1, pathological mental deterioration. And please highlight this. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was living, one might say, to drink. Next to that, put the number 1 and the word hopeless. There's the first qualification. You must be hopeless. Just for the heck of it, Maureen, if you put up the thing you just had up, number 50, there's the one I was referring to. It's just a picture of Hank Parkhurst, who was Bill's partner in writing the book. And the next one, number 50, is an extended bio that you have in your emails that if you check, you may want to read and get into more detail. Just go to the next one. I think you'll find it. It's number 50, Hank's extended bio. But let's talk about Hank. I don't want to waste more time. He was drinking, one might say, living to drink, type classification 1, hopeless. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope, like we said, hopeless. Following the elimination of alcohol, underline elimination of alcohol, and in the margin to the right of it, right, number 2, detox. First, you have to be hopeless. Then you have to be detoxified. You have to remove the poison from your body. So he's saying following that detox, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. This is the other thing I was referring to. It's an extended biography on Hank. You may find it fascinating. It's written by Bob Kay. It's just got some great information in it. But continuing, they found no brain injury. And highlight this, he accepted the plan outlined in the book, and next to that, write the number 3, the solution. He applied the solution, the steps. We didn't have 12 steps at that point. But Hank Parkhurst, for what it's worth, had been in the hospital, had been in Towns Hospital 10 times. And it was on his 10th visit that he met Bill Wilson. I'd like to say it was his last because he did relapse sometime later. But he was in the hospital 10 times before he ran into Bill Wilson and found the solution and stayed sober for a period of time. So we have number 1, you're hopeless. Number 2, detoxification. Number 3, apply the solution. He says, 1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partially recognized his features, but there all resemblance ended. Please highlight this next sentence. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck, in other words, suffering from a spiritual malady, he had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. And next to that, right, number 4, the result, spiritual awakening. Hopeless, detoxification, apply the solution, get the result, spiritual awakening. A man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel I'd known him before. Please underline, to me, he was a stranger. In other words, he had recreated his life. And so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol. He's not the same person he was before. When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought in by a prominent physician prominent in New York. This was October 1935, which was the same time as when Hank came in, incidentally. The patient had made his own diagnosis. That patient's name is Fitz Mayo. His full name, there we go, Fitz Mayo. John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo. That's his story, was our Southern friend from the big book. But that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Fitz Mayo. I'm sorry. Sorry. Let me just mute one again. Okay. So the patient had made his own diagnosis and deciding the situation hopeless. Let's highlight hopeless. Next to it in the margin, write number 1, hopeless. Had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. Underline determined to die. There you go. That's the one. Click on that one. Number 51, that one, Maureen. Up to the top.
My computer's not responding.
Okay, there it is. That's the one. Just click on it if you can. If not, that's all right. There we go. There's Fitz Mayo. John Henry Fitzhugh Mayo. Cut a dashing figure. So he came in hopeless, number one in the margin, hopeless, had deserted, hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. He was going to make the supreme sacrifice. He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his, please highlight physical rehabilitation. And in the margin to the right, let's put number 2, detoxify. Physical rehabilitation, his alcohol is removed. He had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. You would have the willpower, means have the mental control to resist the impulse. Do you think the impulse is the allergies manifestation of craving, or is it the mental obsession? I think it's the mental obsession. Because once it's in us, it's not up to us anymore. So he thought he could be guaranteed that he would not have to give in to that obsession. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology. Please circle moral psychology. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And we doubted if even that would have any effect. Excuse me. That's the second mention of moral psychology in this section. He never explains what he means by moral psychology. In the original notes for this section, he did. For whatever reason, when Bill was rewriting it, he forgot to put it in. So I'm going to read it to you in a moment. But let me finish up what is in the book. And he said, if we doubted if even that would have any effect. However, he did highlight this, sold on the ideas contained in this book. And in the margin on the right, write number 3, solution applied. The 12 steps. He became sold on the ideas contained in this book. He admitted his powerlessness. He made a decision to practice the program of action that's outlined in the book. He had not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is, and please highlight this phrase, as fine a specimen of manhood as one could wish to meet. And next to that, put number 4, the result. He was hopeless. He hid out in the barn. They found him, detoxified him, applied the solution. The result was a fine specimen of manhood. That's the result. Continuing, he says, I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book. Please underline those 3 words. Read this book through. And please highlight the last line. And though perhaps came to scoff, he may remain to pray. In other words, those of you who came to this chapter looking to sneer at it, to mock it, to laugh it, to ridicule it, to poke fun at it, to doubt it. Members of the medical community, those of you who doubted it, maybe you'll stick around and continue reading and come to pray. This is a man of science who says solution is prayer, not writing out a prescription for a Valium deficiency. It is prayer. Now, one of the things I sent you in the email was an excerpt from Writing the Big Book, where Bill Shaberg includes the section of this that was left out, the explanation of what moral psychology is. It's number 53 on your screen shares, Maureen, if you want to find it. But it's a little hard to read, so I'm going to read it. It looks like this. It's in your email. And if you have Writing the Big Book, Bert, it's on page 138 and 139. If you have this book, Writing the Big Book, page 138 and 139 includes the section that was deleted. And this is what it says there. It says, In his April 1937 paper entitled Reclamation of the Alcoholic, that article outlines his own three-step medical procedure for the successful treatment of alcoholics and fully describes the last of these steps, which he calls moral psychology. This phrase has caused considerable confusion over the years because it appears twice in Silkworth's big book chapter, The Doctor's Opinion, without any explanation whatsoever. But in this article, the doctor is clear that is in the Reclamation of the Alcoholic, and you all have copies of that. I sent that last week and again this week. It's in your emails, and it's called Reclamation of the Alcoholic. See if I can show you what it looks like, but you've got it. You have it for 2 weeks already. Looks like this. Reclamation of the Alcoholic. This is the article when he said earlier that he wrote an article some years back, April 1937, that didn't go over well in the medical community. This is that article. And if you read it, it's written in medical terms because it's not written for laymen. It's written for doctors. But you could see what he's talking about. He's talking about the physical allergic reaction to the ingestion of alcohol. And he's saying that the solution lies in moral psychology. He didn't use the term spiritual experience. We did, but it means the same thing. So continuing on page 139 of Writing the Big Book, he says, but in this article, the doctor is clear that the primary function of moral psychology is to address the underlying egotism found in alcoholics whose interest centers entirely in themselves. And when successfully applied, that's a reclamation of the alcoholic. That is the article that was in the Lancet Journal. It's not what I'm reading now. But he says that the alcoholic whose primary interest centers on themselves, when successfully applied, it liberates them to the point where they begin to ask how they can help others. The purpose of moral psychology, then, is to assist alcoholics in overcoming their perspective of extreme self-centeredness and encouraging them to adopt an attitude of consideration for others. In Silkworth's opinion, this shift of perspective away from self-obsession and towards others was of paramount importance in keeping alcoholics from taking their next drink. In other words, a change of thinking away from self-obsession to actually giving a damn about somebody else. Moral psychology, which we call spiritual experience, to go from self-obsessed to God-obsessed, in a sense, to go from self-centered to God-centered. That's what moral psychology is. It's that change of personality. It is a spiritual awakening. It is, as we've already read, a psychic change. But that's what was originally written in the doctor's opinion. And for some reason, I think Bill just forgot to put it in there. But you can see it in Writing the Big Book on page 138 and 139. Or if you look in your emails that was sent out this morning, it looks like that. So basically, we've just read the doctor's opinion, which answers the question, why can't I drink like anybody else? That's it. That's what it's about. Why can't I drink like anybody else? Because I have this obsession and I have this allergy. We've got about 5 minutes. Let's see if we can get a few hands in. Of course, Bert, sure. Let's go.
Oh, hello, fam. My name is Bert. I'm grateful becoming alcoholic. I just want to ask that people start registering for the AA convention in Canada next year. That's all.
Oh, okay.
It's out already, so I just wanted to
Okay.
share that with people. That's all.
And again, if you want to join Kathy and I in Belfast, those tickets are going quickly too. So you may want to act on that. Barney.
Hi, yeah, I'm Barney, alcoholic. I was just thinking about, the different types of alcoholic, and I was thinking that I can identify myself in all of those types at various different stages of my alcoholism, which is really quite interesting. I just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, me too. Patrick,
Thank you, Howard. Just under what we just talked about, under moral psychology, and I do have the reclamation of the alcoholic, and I read that part, but I wrote abbreviation, less of self, more on others.
yeah.
Thank you.
I think I heard someone say, thinking of ourselves is part of the problem. Thinking of others is part of the solution, right? That was great. We actually got a few hands in. Thank you all for being here. Come next week, we're going to be watching that story. It's a phenomenal documentary. Tell people about it. Tell other meetings about it. We can accommodate up to 500 people here. So we can well handle as many people as want to show up. Like I said, last year we had about 300 people. So tell them about it next week, 5 o'clock, Bill W. documentary. We're going to wrap it up in our usual manner, which is, I think, who takes us out? Is that Maureen? I'm sorry, is that Charlotte? Yep. Charlotte, Charlotte will read a vision for you, and about halfway through, we're going to ask you all to unmute and join us in the rest. And thank you. You've done a great job, Maureen. It's just an amazing task. Just so everyone knows, I let Maureen know about this about 5 minutes before the meeting started. So she's done an amazing job. Okay, Charlotte, it's up to you.
Thank you, Kathy. My name's Charlotte. I'm an alcoholic. A vision for you. A book is only meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order. Just need to scroll.
Can't see the rest of it, Maureen. Well, Charlotte, if you've got the book, just let's turn to 164. You all have that. Page 164.
Sorry, Howard, my computer's not responding.
Okay, that's okay. You've done an amazing job. It's unbelievable. I never could have done that much. So Charlotte, page 164, our book is meant, there we go.
Oh, the answers will come if your own house is in order. But obviously you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and
Let's unmute and join us.
Abandon yourself to God as you understand God.
To
Him and to your fellows.
Way to him.
What you have what you can join us. With you in the fellowship of the Spirit. Some of us as you trudge the road. With you until then.
Keep you until then.
I will be done.
Thank you, everybody. So much, Howard.
Thanks,
and
everybody.
Kathy.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Kathy.
you, everybody.
Yeah.
Love and blessings.
God bless you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Maureen.
Howard.
Thank you, Howard. Good night. Bye-bye.
Are we not doing the Lord's
Nice to
Prayer?
hear your voice,
So,
Charlotte.
I was finished. I didn't get to.
Hi, Regina.
Sorry, folks. Are we not doing the Lord's
Great
Prayer?
job, Maureen.
Great.
Hey,
Lord's
Maureen.
Prayer.
Thank you all behind the scenes.
You're not doing the Lord's Prayer.
Thank you all. Please come next week. Pass it. You could screen share, screen capture. Take it. transfer that and pass it around. Scott, how are you?
Good, Howard. I just said, do we not do the Lord's Prayer now?
Well, we do, but we're kind of winging it today a little bit.
Okay.
Okay.
I need to give you a call tomorrow. I've got to give you an heads up about stuff.
Okay, please do.
All right. Great
Actually, if
meeting.
anyone
Thank
wants
you.
to join us, anyone wants to join us, we'll go out in Lord's Prayer right now with whoever's here. We all know it. If you'd like to, our Father,
Our brother,
Who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name.
hallowed be thy name.
Kingdom come.
Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done.
Thy
As
will
it
be
is
done.
Give us
in heaven.
As it
is in
Give us
heaven.
this day our
Give
daily
us this
prayer.
our daily bread.
Forgive us our
We forgive
trespasses,
Also,
as we forgive those who trespass against us.
against
Lead us
us.
Lead
not
us
into
not into
temptation, but
Lead us not
deliver
temptation.
us
into
from evil.
Deliver
temptation,
us from
The
evil.
thine is the
deliver us
kingdom,
from
the
evil.
power,
Kingdom,
and the
the
glory,
power,
Thine is
and
the
the
forever
glory,
kingdom,
forever and
power,
ever.
and glory,
Amen.
forever and
Thank you,
ever.
people.
Amen.
I've got to bounce.
God
I've
bless
got to
all.
go to that other meeting I'm sharing at shortly, so I got to get out of here real fast. Hamid, good to see you. I didn't say hello before. My man Hamid. Rachel, thank you. Great job. Thank you all for helping out. Gary, I appreciate all your help here. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Maybe I'll see you at the other meeting in a little while.